Hello, team. Remember me? It's Jonathan MS Pearce. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. And it is another news update for the Ukraine war for the 27th of July 2023. This is, as usual at the moment, to be split into two videos. There'll be a video coming out just after this with the second part. First part often gets restricted, but I may just talk about the videos rather than show them because I think it's them that get me restricted. Anyway, let's go to our opening gambit. Our usual first port of call: the Ukrainian general staff figures for Russian losses for the day before. There's quite a lot of activity going on the front line, but the numbers are fairly standard with regard to what we've been experiencing or what has been happening in Ukraine over the last few months. So 590 liquidated personnel, 9 tanks, 11 APVs. So there or thereabouts. 18 artillery systems. That's still a heavy loss, a day of heavy losses for the Russians there. Not the biggest that we've seen. We have seen it over 40 on certain days. 18 is still problematic for the Russians. 3 drones, 40 cruise missiles. That is that including last night? No, that'd be the night before. At least the drones isn't last night. There were more drones last night. The cruise missiles might be last night's cruise missile attacks. It depends when they record these statistics. What time in the evening is a cutoff point. 11 vehicles and fuel tanks. No piece of special equipment, which is unusual. But 18 vehicles and fuel tanks is another heavy loss in terms of logistics. But yes, we are seeing that continued degradation of the Russian forces there. Of course, the Ukrainian forces will be losing equipment as well, particularly as there are rumors that they are doing their full offensive, although some people are denying that as well. But depends who you listen to, I guess. Estonia's outgoing ambassador to Kyiv, so just trying to give some sense of whether the figures that the Ukrainian general staff give are somewhat reliable or not. So the Estonia's outgoing ambassador to Kyiv said that based on his meetings with Ukrainian military officials, the Russians are still suffering more casualties at a ratio of 6 for every 1 Ukrainian. Now, you could argue that the Estonian person might be giving disinformation here purposefully. I doubt that. It's more likely that the Ukrainians are bigging up their accomplishments on the in the battle on the battlefield to the Estonian ambassador. That's more likely, but more likely still is that the Russians are losing more than the Ukrainians at a substantial figure. 6-1 is the claim. The question is, as I'm saying, is that what the Ukrainians themselves definitely believe, or are they misinforming the Estonian? I have a feeling. I don't know. Maybe I'm deeply inside that kind of bubble, but I I feel that the Russians are losing, you know, numbers of troops at a ratio that is really disadvantageous to them. And I've been doing this long enough to kind of get a sense of the figures and the evidence to back this up, and a real sense of what I think is the reality there. Ukrainian special forces captured a group of Russian paratroopers who surrendered from their entrenched position in the northern sector of Staromilsky during the liberation operation. I'm saying that because there's some rumors that there's some intel coming out of that. There's also just a number of bits of footage of Ukrainians Ukrainian forces capturing a number of POWs. That's still going on. The Russians are losing not only in terms of casualties, but in terms of POWs and arguably deserters as well. Right. I reported that a Ka-52 was shot down, attack helicopter. Uh, this there's a lot of talk about actually that strike. Not only is it a loss in terms of an expensive piece of kit, but the pilots, or at least one of the pilots, was quite high ranking. 38th Marines Brigade of ZSU, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, shot down the Ka-52 and killed the commander of the 112th Separate Helicopter Regiment of the Russian Armed Forces, Colonel Vitaly Tabachnikov. And this, lots of people talking about this. Trentelenko saying the death in combat of the Russian VKS Ka-52 pilot, Colonel Tabachnikov, is another sign of Russia eating the seed corns of future military power for one more erg of combat power today. In other words, what he's saying is that the Russians are using higher. But there are several things that can be said about this. That you've got a high-ranking pilot, which means that lower-ranking pilots aren't there to be used. So that is one issue that some are claiming. It also leads to the situation where younger pilots perhaps aren't being trained by these older pilots, or by the colonel isn't back doing what he should be to uh, produce an active and decent fighter force uh, set of pilots for the future. Stuff like this does tell you things. His son's also a pilot in the Russian army. I advise him to stay home and mourn the loss of his dad, says P-Star 11. Yeah, the Ka-52 attack helicopter shot down yesterday had the commander of the 112th Helicopter Regiment among the crew members. 2 crew members were lost. Okay, Russian troops deliberately attacked rescuers who arrived to eliminate a fire in Toretsk. So Toretsk is between Bakhmut and Avdiivka. There was a fire in the of the fields here, and then this classic tactic that the Russians have used throughout the war, which is attack somewhere, and then when the rescuers go to clear it up or take out the casualties, attack it again and take out these emergency services members. Is just horrific. Okay, Ukrainian forces took out Russian tanks with 155mm bonus shells. I'm seeing more and more footage of these where they explode up here and release 2 submunitions that then do top-down attacks on whatever it is. In this case, a tank. So you see explosion up there. There's an explosion up there as well, and it goes down and takes out the tank. So they are being used more and more, it seems, and that is good news, because these are precision guided munitions. They're going to hit the tank. They're going to take out the tanks. It's good quality munition to use. Here we have a first person view drone taking out a TOS-1A. I won't show it just in case I get restricted, but basically it's a high value target. TOS-1A thermobaric rocket launchers are pretty revered. They're not pleasant in the damage they deal out. But yeah, so that's a high value target taken out by a first person view drone that seem to be continuing to wreak havoc behind Russian lines, but actually also behind Ukrainian lines. So there's not only the Russians are the Russians using first person view drones in a kind of adaptation, seeing what the Ukrainians have been doing and the success they've had in their army of drones, provision of these FPV drones, racing drones, and RPG-7 warheads on board, and other similar munitions, and seeing that they are cheap, cheerful, and really highly effective. The Russians are now catching up. There were claims earlier on in the war, the Russians themselves claiming that they were 6 months behind in that. I don't know if they're catching up in that respect, but the Lancet loitering munitions are still being effectively used. And in Russia, Mi-8 transport helicopter crashed near the village of Jingur in the Ust-Koksinsky district of the Altai Republic after hitting a power line. Reportedly, 6 people were killed, 7 were injured. So that is a bad loss for them in terms of personnel and military equipment. Right, moving on to strikes. And it was a really significant night last night. So Zelensky himself said more than 30 missiles were shot down during today's missile raid alone. There are several hits. So actually, the reason why those cruise missile figures are on the daily stats is because actually it happened in the daytime, didn't it? And I've got footage to show that. So anyway, sorry, there were several hits. And there are falling fragments of missiles, but the audacity of the attack was destroyed. By the way, our boys on the front had a very good results today. So Zelensky is quite buoyed by the performance of the troops along the front line, but also a serious attack with missiles. So throughout the day, 45 Kinzhal or X-101 KH-555 missiles and Caliber missiles were launched at Ukraine. So it was a pretty big day of missiles. Of those 45 missiles, a total of 38 missiles were intercepted. That's 84.4% interception rate, which is pretty good. 4 Kinzhals got through. So these are supposedly the hypersonic missiles that are you can't take them down except Patriot can take them down. So it depends where you're using them. If you're using them outside of Patriot's ranges, then you're going to have more success. 3X101 KH555s as well were not intercepted. The question is, where did those 7 missiles land? How much damage did they do? Did they hit really important strategic targets? So the Ukrainians are very good with operational security in not letting information get out of successful strikes. They kind of happen, you don't really know about it, and then maybe some months later you're like, oh, something was hit then. They've made it illegal for people to share footage of that to keep a tight lid on the information flow. For better or for worse, if you're big on freedom of information, then that might annoy you, but hey, it's a war and completely understandable. So they have changed the law, tightened that, and we just don't hear often of the successful Russian strikes. I mean, there's plenty of footage to show cruise missiles flying over. Just in case you don't know what a cruise missile looks like, yeah, that must be pretty scary to see something like that firing this kind of programmed missile doing its thing, flying overhead. Now, one of the targets was an airbase. Is that here? Yes. So a combined Russian cruise and ballistic missile attack targeted the military airfield at Starokostiantsev, hosting Su-24M tactical bombers that launched UK-donated Storm Shadows. It is yet unclear if all were shot down. So the question is, did those missiles have any success against this airbase? That would be significant. What the Russians want to do is disrupt the Ukrainian ability to fire Storm Shadow missiles. They are causing untold amounts of damage behind the lines. This must be surely target number one for the Russians, to hit those planes in the airbase that are housing these Storm Shadow airframes. Now, after that, K drones, loitering munitions, these Shahed drones flew into Ukraine. Explosions reported in Kharkiv and launched from Belgorod, possibly. Most important news first, a quiet night in Ukraine, says Tim White eventually. When I ended Wednesday's thread, the threat from drones looked to be over, and indeed it was, with a 100% success rate in destroying all 8 drones sent in to attack. Again, targeting the Starokostiantinov airfield. That's significant. They really are evidently trying to take out Storm Shadow missile provision. Right, here we have FAB or KAB bombs, I think. Yep, winged glide bombs being used against food storage and production facilities. This is Granaria Kozatse in Kherson. Again, this is to me a pretty blatant war crime. You've got food. You've got food storage facilities there, clearly getting absolutely hammered by Russian munitions and ordnance. Just, it's not good enough. You are hitting the ability for Ukraine to feed themselves or to feed the rest of the world. Just, yeah, it's Russia for you. And at night, Russian aviation dropped FAB-250 aerial bomb on Kivsharivka in Kharkiv Oblast. It hit a nearby 5-story building. One 74-year-old person died, 4 others were injured, says no reports. I mean, does this look like a military base? No. What are you doing, Russia? Still. Now, I don't know. I'm not sure about this. This is a massive crater that Tim White said. He said no telling where or when this was filmed. So don't know about timestamp or location. And so I can't guarantee that this is actually a meaningful bit of footage, especially since it's got green water at the bottom. This is such a big crater. I don't know. So the kind of implication is that Russia have, sent in some huge munition to somewhere. I just don't know how recent that was and whether it tells us much. But just to let you know, there's a massive crater somewhere. Okay, the rumors out yesterday that Russia attacked Snake Island as well, Zmini Island, which is that island, if you remember, in the Black Sea, sort of quite far down the coast. That was where the Russians took over with the stamp of that guy. Remember the Ukrainian naval or marine, I can't remember, chap who they announced, the Russians announced, was it from the Moskva even? You know, we're coming to get you, surrender, and he's just said "f you" and stuck his middle finger up, type thing, to the Russian Navy. He was then made a POW. I think he was released actually, but nonetheless, there was this tussle over that island. Eventually, they put a bunch of Caesars, possibly a Bogdana as well, indigenous Ukrainian self-propelled howitzer. Arguably, put them on barges so they could get closer to the island, and then pummeled the island with artillery ordnance. And eventually, they made it untenable for the Russians to remain on the island. And I presume there are positions on the island like air defense now, giving protection. I don't know, other things possibly on that small rocky outcrop. But yeah, Russians might well have attacked it yesterday. Who knows? Don't know how successful they might have been. Ukraine attacked yesterday, which is unsurprising. Mariupol and Tokmak, as Tim White says, more explosions in occupied. Drum roll. That was a really bad drum impression. Oh, you guessed it already. Tokmak. Enemy positions in the rear reportedly hit. So Tokmak gets hit every single day. Anyway, moving on to other bits and pieces now. There has been a lot of talk about the Russians starting up, the Ukrainians starting up their major thrust of the counteroffensive yesterday. Talk about 80 vehicles, mechanized units or mechanized pieces of equipment being sent into the Robotna area, etc., etc. New York Times released an article saying, yeah, this is their main offensive, and then lots of other news sites following along with that. Main thrust of Ukraine's nearly 2 months old counteroffensive is now underway in the country's southeast, two Pentagon officials said on Wednesday. This is coming from the Pentagon. There is some pushback to this, like people like Kenneth Gregg, who is a Finnish fighter in Ukraine, saying, don't listen, it's a load of rubbish. We're not using anything more than we were previously. But again, is that kind of disinformation itself? So fog of war, etc., etc. Anyway, Rob Lee says this means Ukraine is committing its 10th Corps to a greater extent and possibly reducing the 9th Corps. Some 10th Corps brigades have already been in the fight. Ukrainian forces are approximately 2 to 3 kilometers from the first main line of defenses near Robotna. Confirmation that the main thrust is in the Orikhiv axis, so that's that Robotna area, which was clear from the 47th Mechanized Brigade's presence, so on and so forth. So Shashant Joshi, quoting from the New York Times, says Ukrainian officials have told US officials that the enlarged Ukrainian force would try to advance south through Russia's minefields and other fortifications towards the city of Tokmak, and if successful, onto Melitopol near the coast. I mean, that was the original plan anyway, wasn't it? The new operation, if successful, could take 1 to 3 weeks. Ukrainian officials have told officials in Washington, this is a big test, said one senior official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. Ukraine sensed an opportunity with the sacking of the regional commander, Major General Ivan Popov, to exploit turmoil in the local Russian leadership. The Russians are stretched, a Western official said on Wednesday. So on and so forth. So those are the claims, and you're seeing those similar sort of claims and reference to the New York Times article in many other online news sources and mainstream media outlets. A really important distinction is being drawn by Michael Weiss and who's that? Is that Jimmy Rushton? Yeah, Jimmy Rushton, who's a Kiev-based independent foreign policy security analyst. While some in the West are bemoaning the supposedly slow Ukrainian counteroffensive, Russian sources described a very worrying and effective Ukrainian operation. So this is referring to a Newsline Mag piece as well. Here, so it's written by Weiss and Rushton, actually refers to loads of sources I've already shared with you previously, Russian sources, that is, throughout the days. Some of these, Karl as well from Estonian military, but also a bunch of Russian sources Khodorkovsky as well, and Telegram sources and whatnot. So nothing I haven't already told you, but it's just an interesting kind of synthesis of all these data points where the Western analysts and the Western media are going, "Oh my goodness, it's all so slow. It's a failed offensive," and you get your Russian shills in like YouTube threads like mine. You know who you are, your Clive Engels and your Trevors and your Nikos G and all these kind of people go, "Oh, it's a failure. It's a failure. Solid for life. Oh, it's a failure." And then some Western analysts saying, "Oh, it's going a bit slowly. Oh, I'm not sure about this." But when you look at the Russian sources on the ground, they tell a bit of a different story, and they say, "Oh yeah, do you know what? It's going pretty well for the Ukrainians, and we're in a bit of trouble. And we've got no counter battery fire. Our artillery's been, there was talk about the quote was genocide of our artillery. They are absolutely wiping our artillery out. Things are not looking great. So actually, when you look at those sources, and this is what this article does, it looks at those sources. Again, we refer to Russian sources. And this is one I shared with you previously. I remember the summer when Ukrainians received HIMARS, and the warehouse began to burn like matches. Um, the appearance of the Storm Shadow missiles forces us to move the warehouses even further away from the front line, or to look for another solution. In general, we will have to be very scrupulous about the protection and placement of ammunition. So again, this acceptance that they are getting absolutely hammered logistically behind the lines, as well as Ukrainian forces advancing every day, and it being a lot more problematic on the front line for the Russians than some other people might be saying. So that's well worth reading. What else do we have? A mere 360 days after the UN comes to, another 360 days later, the UN comes to the same conclusion. Right. What is this conclusion? Well, if you remember, there was a prison in Olenivka where they were holding predominantly high value Azov regiment prisoners of war, and the prison blew up. It was hit by a rocket, and the Russians like, "Oh, it's been hit by HIMARS rocket," and the Ukrainians like, "What are you talking about?" Basically, the Russians had just killed a bunch of POWs, possibly because they didn't want to have to deal with them, possibly because they just wanted to kill the Azov regiment, so on and so forth. But anyway, it was kind of false flag where the Russians were blaming the Ukrainians. And anyway, a year later, pretty much, the UN has looked at all the data and gone, yeah, no, the Russians are talking a load of BS, which is what everyone was saying at the beginning. So it wasn't a Gimler's rocket, it was a thermobaric weapon. Russia staged it and did so, as usual, incompetently, said Thomas Tyner back in July 2022. Well, as CNN reports here, the UN have come to the same conclusion. UN rejects the Russian account of the attack that killed 50 Ukrainian prisoners, confirming findings of a CNN investigation, which is the conclusion is that's a big old war crime yet again. Russia, what are you doing? And again, it comes back to those kind of people in the threads defending Russia to the hilt. Are you A, on the right side? And B, are you a decent, moral human being? Take a look in the mirror at yourself. Because I'm tired of you coming on and going, well, this is what TASS says, and oh, how wonderful Russia are. No, what a failure this counteroffensive is. Wanting to poke holes. And actually, I've got an issue with some other YouTubers. I won't name names, but when they come up on my feeds and I look at the other mappers and the way they couch things is always pro-Russian. Like it's the little words. Like they'll say attempted Ukrainian thrust over the last 2 days. Whereas when they do like the Russian thrust up in Luhansk, it's like wonderful Russian like attack, like and how terrible it is for Ukrainians. And when the Ukrainians do something good, it's like, oh, they're attempting to do something. Just little words like that. It's like, where's your morality here? Like, why are you? Are you just pandering to? I don't know who lines your pockets or something. I don't know, but it annoys me, and that there is morality involved here. And if you are sitting there wanting to defend, like for me, I want to defend Ukraine, but I'm not going to lie to you about what's going on, right? Because that doesn't help anyone, and it doesn't help me, and I'm not interested in that. but but I want to defend what Ukraine are doing. I want them to prevail because that's the right moral decision. But if you're wanting Russia to prevail, and you've got stuff like this in your locker, like what kind of human being are you? Anyway, sorry, that's another rant. Right. Russia here. FSB imposes a ban on civilians visiting the Arabat Spit in Crimea. Interesting. Why would that be the case? Uh, Obviously, it's quite an important uh, route onto Crimea, but it is quite precarious as well, as it's just a thin spit that goes from Henichesk up here, and you've got a bridge connects it, and then all the way down to the mainland down there. It's quite. I mean, history has told us that if you try and attack down there, you can be hit by the sea, you can be hit by artillery from here. It's just, yeah, it's not probably the best place to hang out. But if they're stopping the general public going on the Arabat Spit, what are the Russians going to be using that as as some kind of, I don't know, place to place equipment? I don't know. But anyway, it's just interesting that has taken place. And then here we've got yet another um, issue with drones, Syria, Russia, and the Americans. A Russian fighter jet attacked another American drone in Syria. Sixth time in a month. 6 times. On July the 26th, a Russian fighter fired flares and shot down another American drone in Syrian airspace. The US claims that less than a day has passed since less than a day that had passed since the previous incident when Russian military aircraft flew dangerously close to American manned and unmanned aircraft. I didn't realize it was a manned one as well, putting crews and aircraft at risk. 2 US officials confirmed on condition of anonymity that the MQ-9 Reaper drone was damaged in the Russian attack. White House spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre also commented on another provocation by the Russians, noting that such attacks are a violation of international law. And it goes back to, what do you do about this? As a number of you were saying, actually on these drones, they should put some kind of munition that you can just explode if the Russian, and you warn the Russians, say, if you get close to this, it will explode. Or it has an autonomous self-defense missile that gets fired off in the event of an aircraft getting too close. So, do something like that, and then that will keep them back, maybe. I don't know, that could be an option. But, short of going to war with Russia, how do you stop Russia doing this? They're just pushing that envelope further and further. Anyway, thank you for watching. That's the end of this opening video in my pair of news videos. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for all your support, and check out number 2.